Welcome to Information Literacy. First chapter, welcome to the information fog. The information age actually began back in the 1990s. It's been driven by the World Wide Web. We now have more access to knowledge than any other time in human history, and we now live in a more complicated time because of all of that information that we have access to. Information used to be scarce. Now we have access to Google and other search devices, which provides us with more access to information than before. This has given way to a lot of useless knowledge. This is not a new thing. We have had propaganda, rag mags, and such have been around for ages. Just check out your local grocery store checkout counter. We live in a time that we have access to now more tools than just Google. So we have access to even more high-tech tools to gain access to information. Information's purpose is to inform, be relevant, and current. Before the information age, there were objective standards for information and proven ways to arrive at answers. We knew how to get to the information, we knew where to get the information, we knew who to get the information from. Now we don't even know what the questions are. Information is colored with subjectivity, regardless of how we try to not make it so, because of our inherent biases that each of us has. And the fact that we are no longer a trusting people. We don't trust people anymore. You need to understand information to use it most effectively. It is a tool. And as with all tools, you need to know how to use the tool properly. Before there was print, knowledge was passed down by speech and demonstration for generations. This is still done in a way in traditional societies and even in our own. For example, cooking with grandma, the family recipes, working on the car with dad, family stories. All of these are knowledge that is passed down just like it has been for years in traditional society. In some societies, this is done in order to survive. Information in this case has to be reliable. So it's only passed down by certain people that are deemed qualified by the society to pass down that information. New information and discoveries are not encouraged. You only have so much room in your brain to remember all this stuff, and so they're not going to add to it by adding new discoveries and information. This is only created when there's a need to do so. And then it's only done by those that are knowledgeable and that are recognized as knowledgeable to pass down that information. The emphasis is on retaining all of the known knowledge that exists for that society. Written language brought about change. Memorization and the verbal sharing of knowledge continued, but now there was less reliance on memory and knowing everything. We began to look things up, that is, if we could. The keepers and recorders of knowledge had power, and they used it to control the flow of knowledge to people. This is still used to an extent today when information is not released to certain individuals. Even among the monks that controlled the information at that time, there were certain scribes that had access to this information, certain scribes that had access to this information. So there was levels of scribes that had access to the different levels of information. So even amongst them, the information was controlled. The knowledge base was more secure, and some discoveries began. It was secure because not everyone had access to it. It was very much controlled. Even for those that did have access to the materials beyond the monks, You would walk into a library in those days and all the books would be chained to the tables. Nobody could take a book out of a library. It was all kept safe. Still, though, the people that had access to the knowledge, aka the scribes, controlled who had access to the knowledge to make discoveries. Thus, they hindered the advancement of discovery. An excellent movie, or book, should you be brave enough to read it, that is based on this is the book The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. And I would highly recommend that you read this book. Or at least watch the movie. It's an excellent example of this. When the printing press was invented and put to general use by Gutenberg, what he actually did was take a Chinese invention that had been around for years and made it more usable by adding movable type. And he used it to its advantage. Once again, a tool. Learn how to use it and use it well. The access to the printing press allowed multiple copies to be made, which that sounds like a great thing. Printing was invented. Everyone had access. Not really. It was many years before the common man had the ability to afford the printed word. So once again, information was controlled and kept from the main populace. The information was still controlled, but the grasp on information was lessening as knowledge became more freely available to others. More discoveries were possible as the knowledge was more available. As knowledge multiplied, there was more access to knowledge. Yes, and that was all well and good if you could afford it. So the access to knowledge was concentrated among those that could afford it, aka the rich people, and the church, still, the monks. Universities were developed, but once again, only those that were rich enough could actually go to them. And along with the universities being developed were newer discoveries as they studied their different fields. Gatekeeping was developed. What gatekeeping is to ask if information is worthy of print and will it sell. Emphasis on will it sell, still today. It depends on the level of scholarship, reliability, and entertainment value. Sometimes, or not sometimes, most times, it's based on the aims of the publisher and the desire of the marketplace. It's a good thing when it helps preserve quality, but it also leads to censorship of information and maintaining the status quo or certain biases. Self-publication has been developed because of that. I've done this twice. I have 2 books out on Amazon. And people have always been able to do it once the printing press developed and they could get access to something to be printed. It's not been an easy process, but it's gotten easier with Amazon and others, and it's also become more legitimate through the years. More self-published works are out there now than commercial print, and the quality of the self-published books have increased. Also, with the rise of universities, subject disciplines developed. This allowed people to specialize in specific fields of discovery so they could become more focused. But also, discoveries in these defined fields have a narrow focus and there's more in-depth research, but there's a separation of knowledge. These people that had those certain areas, they developed a specific language. They developed specific experts, aka Hawking or Asimov in astronomy, or Badke and Zollers in information literacy. Discipline-specific methods on how to do research were developed. Thus, the rise of the wonderful favorite manuals of all college students, the MLA handbook and the APA handbook, and the multitude of other style menus that you will be faced with throughout your educational career. Following this, many years later, entered the World Wide Web. Contrary to popular belief, the World Wide Web is not the entire Internet. It is only part of the Internet. It's a tool used to access the information that exists on the Internet. This has erased the boundaries to knowledge. It's the greatest aspect of free speech in history. And anyone now can share their knowledge, put their knowledge out there on the Internet. Gatekeepers still do exist in some instances, and they're valued, but it's not always present on the World Wide Web. The procedure's been turned over to the consumer, just like buyer beware with any products that are out on the market. The author of the information supposedly does some gatekeeping, but it's usually up to the consumer to make the decision of whether it's valuable or not. Information can be published and acquired at a rate never seen before. Information doubles by years. Right now, sociological topics, social issue topics, all that information changes within 8 years, and I'm not surprised that it's probably 6 years, every 6 years. Medical topics. When I first started, it was like 5 or 6 years. Now it's down to 3, every 3 years. When you are dealing with computer-related or technology-related topics, you don't even use a book. Because by the time the book would get published and out on the field, out on the library shelf, the information's already outdated, because most of that information is outdated in 3 to 6 months. Is how fast technology is moving, and probably faster than that. It can lead to all this access to information can lead to being overwhelmed in what's called information overload or information fatigue syndrome. Our brains can only process so much information at a time. If we feed it a constant diet of news, other information, other things that we have to remember, such in times of crisis or being stressed, you have experienced this probably as a student, undoubtedly. We develop a feeling of being overwhelmed, we get emotional, we get tired, and among many other systems. And sometimes we just shut down because we can't handle it anymore. Information has become not valuable, it's still valuable. That's what I'm trying to say, is it's not priceless anymore in some cases. Now it's considered cheap and plentiful. You can get it anywhere. Authority is all leveled out. The average person only looks at the top 5 links on a Google search. So if they don't rate in those top 5, then you're not going to get access to it. Which means a very popular site by someone who plays an expert on TV, but is not a real expert, can a lot of times outweigh one that is an expert who's on page 2 or 3. The dark web that they talk about in your book is also the content that's accessible only by having passwords and authorization to access it, such as the databases at the college, periodical databases. You have to have a password to get into them, so they would be considered the dark web. So, what about the tools for information today? What have we got that we can use to gather this information? Well, we still have books. Print books are continuing despite the rise of e-books. And in a lot of cases, they are considered more preferable than the ebooks in doing research, especially. A lot of people want the book as opposed to the actual using an ebook, because ebooks are so cumbersome when you're trying to do research. E-readers like Kindles and such are becoming old technology. In a lot of places, in a lot of instances, ebooks are becoming a thing of the past. Academic ebooks especially use software, and it makes them really difficult to download. Print textbooks are still preferred by students. You ask any student on the campus and they'll say they'd much rather have a print textbook than a e-textbook. There's been departments that's actually tried to go to an e-book and it's not been accepted. There's also a lot of open access and digitization projects that have developed because of this. There's more on the open access movement later. We'll talk about that in a minute. Free materials are not going to come anytime soon, though. Somewhere along the pike, somebody has to pay for it. Yes, there are free ebooks out there. Yes, there is free information out on the internet. Yes, there are free websites. But somebody has to pay for the website. Somebody has to pay for the person to keep up the website, etc., etc., etc. So somebody has to pay. It's not free. And somewhere along the line, you're going to have to pay, if nothing more than paying your cable company or your student fees to have access to the internet. So it's not free. Authors and publishers are always going to want their money. And this also leads to book piracy, which is a lot like music piracy, downloading books that really aren't available for you to download. Self-publication and print on demand is increasing in those areas. Journals and magazines. Most paper journals, a lot of magazines have now transferred to digital formats. Gatekeeping and peer review continues to help with those. They're make them more reliable, especially with academic journals. There is a difference between an academic journal article and what's found on a Google search, and we'll talk about more about that later on. A general definition, this is a general one, of a scholarly journal is one that has little or no pictures. It's published by an academic institution. It has lots of citations, and it's not generally accessible by Google unless it's available in the open access movement. So there again, this is all changing. Even from when Badke wrote the book, things have been changing. Now, I offer you the first of many in this course, Ancient Research Hint. The citations at the end of the article that are spot on to what you are researching are a treasure trove, and they've been used by researchers for years. They've looked at these and they have used those to go ahead and do their own research. Think about it. When you finish a paper for a class, what do you put at the end of it? A reference page, a works cited page, a bibliography, whatever the term that you're going to use for it. You put the resources that you use to write your paper there. And it's what's the paper's about. So, if you find something, a resource that is spot on to your topic, use those references at the end to further your research. Also, with journals and magazines, we're beginning to see more interactive, especially with graphs and tables and things like that. Now the open access movement. I think this is going to be the next big movement since the information age started. This has been driven by price gouging by academic journal and book publishers. There's a lot of the research for academic journal articles is funded by the government or by a grant, and the funders began to see, oh, these people are getting money to do this research, then they're writing this, then they're getting money for selling what they wrote. That appears to be double dipping. So, thus we develop the open access. A lot of the research that's being published now in open access journals. And in fact, if you get a government grant, more than likely you will be required to make it into the open access and not be able to accept payment for your research if you get it from a government, if you do your research on a government grant. Search engines for these are available. Many are listed in the book and on the library website. And the reputation for these have increased since the movement has gotten going. There are still fake and unreliable information, but the level of scholarship on this format is increasing more and more and more. We're seeing this with the textbooks. Some of your courses that you will take will have what they call OER, Open Educational Resources, which is part of the open access movement, to your coursework. So this shows you how far this movement's going. This is a resource that you'll want to remember, because later on, when you grow up and leave LCC, you will have to continue to do research. There goes that bubble. And you will have to have research material. This open access movement will provide those resources for you. So pay attention to this wherever you can. There's also government and corporation documents that provide very good sources of statistics. Most of them are found on the internet. They're generally accessible for free. And there's different directories that are available to find those government documents. The World Wide Web. There's ongoing issues. It's often used for negative and illegal purposes. There's still a lack of quality. Evaluation skills are lacking amongst people. Remember the top 5. That's all I need. That's just those 5. Information literacy instruction is increasing because there's a need to be able to access and understand this information and evaluate the information. There's need for better catalogs and portals, and we'll talk about those a little bit later when we get into the internet chapter. Better defining of search engines, and you all have experienced this, where you type in a search term and you get 10 million hits. So they need to learn to work with that search engine and make it better to where you could get more specific with your searching. We also have reached what we call Web 2.0. Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 is also out there. The Web 2.0 is really a concept. It's not really part of the internet. It's a concept. It refers to the interactive parts of the web, like social networking, blogs, wikis, online office tools, RSS feeds, forums, chats, email, blah, 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 blah. It's heavy collaborative. And the idea when it all started was that if everybody collaborates all this knowledge, just think of the knowledge explosion we'll have with this collaboration. That's assuming that the connectivity and the collaboration are with people that are knowledgeable on the subject. So that's a little debatable there. Information is only as valuable as the ability of its creators to know something about it and express it in a manner that others learn from it. Another one. Shared opinion is not a fact. No matter how many times you like it, repost it, whatever, it's an opinion. It is not a fact. The Web 3.0 is sort of scary. It's called the semantic web. It's the artificial intelligence that sites like Google, Facebook, and others take our preferences from our searching and what we like and access on the internet, and they change your results to fit them. Interesting experiment. Get a friend. Take your laptop and take their laptop. Both of you do the same search on Google. Why don't you both get the same results? Because Google is looking at what you have searched, and they're toning your search that you are doing now to equal that. And the same with your friend. So that's the semantic web. In other words, they're getting into our business and our private business and our minds and adapting it, which in their view is helping us with our searching. But it could be an invasion of privacy. So beware of that and be aware of it. Primary and secondary information sources. Primary sources are what I call straight from the horse's mouth. They are the ones that are from the period of the subject. They're written by a developer of the subject. That's your primary source. Secondary sources are ones that people have commented on, analyzed, and explained the primary sources. Then you have tertiary sources, which are papers and documents that use both secondary and primary sources to make new knowledge. Sort of like research papers. Academic. What is academic? Academic can be peer specific, especially when they call academic journals. Always, 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 always ask the person who is requesting the information, saying that it has to be from an academic source, what they consider an academic source. Because if you ask an English teacher, they will say one thing, sociology will say another, psychology will say another, nursing will say another. They're all different. So pay attention and ask those. One thing is for sure, it's not a Google or a Wikipedia search. That is not academic. It goes with kind of, after a while, after you've been in your field of study, it will kind of give you, you'll kind of have a gut feeling or authentic that you'll be able to read through and say, no, I don't think so. But right now, make sure and ask your instructors what they consider to be academic. Open peer review. This goes with Web 2.0. This is where, instead of, we talked about gatekeeping, where they evaluate the material. This is where two scholars on the same field evaluate a source with each other and collaborate, and that's kind of a way of doing gatekeeping that way. Not all information is informative. Look for these things. What are the qualifications of the author or the creator of the work? Who else believes that this is good information? Is there a peer review? Is there gatekeeping? Is there biases or vested interests in the research? Why should you believe the information? And number one, biggest reason to pay attention, does it even answer the information need that you have? It can't be informative for your information need if it doesn't answer your information need. So, that is the end of Chapter 1. I have the notes on Red Zone, the lecture notes, but also we have this available. So I hope they're beneficial to you, and we will see you at Chapter 2.